afternoon. I would like to start by saying thank you and that I have enjoyed studying alongside all of you this term, and I wish you all well in your future endeavors. The topic of this presentation is James Madison, Federalist or Anti-Federalist? James Madison has been called the father of the Constitution, and given the amount of writing and input and the role that he played in the Constitution, it is important to understand more about his thoughts and beliefs. This research will show that he argued fiercely for what he believed, but that he was also willing to hear and learn from the ideas of others, and did in fact change his mind in some instances. It is precisely this ability to teach, discuss, debate, learn, and change that made him such a valuable participant in the founding of the early nation. Madison is usually closely associated with Thomas Jefferson, whose opinions on both federalism and Alexander Hamilton are generally well known. Jefferson's vision of America was one of a great agricultural republic that was spread out across the continent. Of Hamilton in 1792, in a letter to then-President George Washington, Jefferson says, "From the moment at which history can stoop to notice him is a tissue of machinations against the liberty of the country, which has not only received and given him bread, but heaped honors upon his head." Jefferson was not a fan of Hamilton. Given the collaborations between Madison and Jefferson, it may seem confusing to some that Madison is also known for being one of the authors of the Federalist Papers alongside Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. Madison wrote 29 of the 85 articles. According to Francis Green in his article, Madison's View of Federalism in the Federalist, he says that some have argued that Madison's essays confirm the work's nickname as the Bible of American Federalism, and others have read them in light of Thomas Jefferson's comment that, in some parts it is discoverable that the author means only to say what may be best said in defense of opinions in which he did not concur. Green says that neither of these views is totally right. He also contends that Madison did see the Constitution as a plan for a supreme but limited government. He says that number 39 is the proof of this, and is Madison's answer to the anti-federalist criticism that the Constitution set up a consolidated government that exceeded the bounds of the Convention's commission. Madison says in Federalist 39, "It appears on the one hand that the Constitution is to be founded on the assent and ratification of the people of America, given by deputies elected for the special purpose, but on the other that this assent and ratification is to be given by the people not as individuals composing one entire nation, but as composing the distinct and independent states to which they respectively belong." Lance Banning, in his book, The Sacred Fire of Liberty, James Madison and the Founding of the Federal Republic, says that in 1783, when a small minority in Congress might have voted for a resolution to convene a federal convention, that Madison opposed it. He says that Madison advocated centralizing measures only so far as they appeared compatible with the interests of Virginia and the fundamental character of the emerging nation. Banning notes that this shows that Madison's approval of a sweeping transformation of the federal system did not date from his early years in Congress and would never take a form that was consistent with the visions of Hamilton at that time. In 1786, Madison did begin to pursue a constitutional convention and accepted a position for Virginia. His manuscript, Vices of the Political System of the United States, pulled together his research and experiences of the last decade. These same arguments against factions and the large republic can be seen in Federalist 10 and numerous letters to other political leaders. According to Myers, the impending chaos that was heightened by Shays' Rebellion closed off any serious consideration by Madison of creating anything less than one sovereign power under a new constitution. He says that although Madison would elaborate, refine, and in some instances change his views in the course of the debates, that his basic commitment to the creation of a supreme national authority marked all of his efforts throughout the summer of 1787. He also says that on the early evidence of 1787, no one could have predicted that Madison would become a leader of the Virginia School of Opposition to centralized power. So how did Madison get to that point? In a pamphlet by William Smith entitled "The Politics and Views of a Certain Party Displayed," Smith discusses the change in Madison after Jefferson's return from Paris. The pamphlet is generally thought to be an attack against Jefferson and has been incorrectly attributed to Hamilton at times. Smith was a Federalist lawyer from South Carolina that was known to be aligned with Hamilton. He begins by giving the readers a state of the country prior to Jefferson's return. He says that the Constitution was adopted, a new era commenced. All real patriots wished for and promised to their country a restoration of public and private credit, a revival of their public faith, encouragement to navigation, commerce, agriculture, and manufactures, dignity, energy, and union to the government, and a name for Americans amongst nations. He goes on to discuss Madison's plan that was introduced and the overall agreement on it, minus 1 point. He notes that a considerable opposition was made to the part of the plan regarding organizing the Treasury Department, but that after judicious comments by Madison, the arguments were withdrawn. He calls Madison the general and Jefferson as generalissimo. He lists all the things that the general supported originally, such as plans for organizing the Treasury Department, improving the public revenues, the president's power to remove government officers, no other amendments, higher pay for senators, a funding system, and several others. Then he says, is it conceivable that he who advised and supported the measures above should now be one of the advisors, supporters, and mainsprings of a faction whose daily employment is to cry down all of those very measures? He notes that Madison gives no opinion with levity, no vote without much previous reflection on its probable effects, that there was not one measure with which he did not receive his most mature consideration before he spoke or voted on it. He says it is scarce necessary to suggest the close intimacy that exists between the general and generalissimo. This, he says, is the key to understanding the change. Smith is right on several things. He's correct to say that Madison did not give opinions with levity, or vote or speak on things without reflection and consideration. He is also correct about the nature of the relationship between Jefferson and Madison. But is the change in Madison's views that simple? In the early 1780s, the Continental Congress was on the verge of bankruptcy, and the state legislatures controlled the flow of money, deciding when and how to meet tax requisitions of Congress. Marvin Myers, in his book, The Mind of the Founder, Sources of the Political Thoughts of James Madison, says that a fear of an establishment of tyranny led Madison to try various ways to form a coalition around a carefully designed plan to try to tempt a variety of interests into conceding power to Congress. Included in this plan was the assumption of state debts. In 1783, together with Hamilton and Oliver Ellsworth, an address to the states on the proposal was drafted. But because of the unanimity rule, the proposal failed. It must have been surprising to Hamilton in 1790 when Madison did a complete turnaround and unexpectedly attacked Hamilton's proposed system on funding. In the Continental Congress, Madison had favored assumption and opposed discrimination on state debt. Now, in 1790, he would mount a determined opposition to his former associate Hamilton's plan. Stanley Elkins and Eric McKittrick, in their book, The Age of Federalism, note that Madison said it was the problem that had changed, not him. They note that this is due to the emergence of speculators, but say Madison's changing views may have had to do with his being a Virginian, and also that his understanding of financial affairs was quite different from Hamilton's, whose focus was finance. In his article, Justice, Republican Energy, and the Search for Middle Ground, James Madison and the Assumption of Debts, the author John Kuhl notes that Madison received a stream of letters from across the Old Dominion, including from Edmund Randolph and Henry Lee, confirming what he already knew, that most Virginians did not want Hamilton's plan enacted. But eventually, Madison seemed to change his views again. Why is this? Well, Kuhl says that Madison knew compromise was essential. In a letter to James Monroe, he says, "I cannot deny that the crisis demands a spirit of accommodation to a certain extent. If the measure should be adopted, I shall wish it to be considered as an unavoidable evil, and possibly not the worst side of the dilemma." Madison knew that the government needed the energy to go on during times of crisis. The talk of disunion played a prominent role in his fears. Madison knew that even though he did not like the plan of assumption and questioned the justice of it, that the slowness of the resolution of this issue was threatening the unity of the country as a whole. In March of 1787, Madison wrote to Jefferson, "It is necessary to arm the federal head with a negative in all cases whatsoever on the local legislatures. Without this defensive power, experience and reflection have satisfied me that however ample the federal powers may be made, or however clearly their boundaries may be delineated on paper, they will be easily and continually baffled by the legislative sovereignties of the states." Yet in his Virginia resolutions of 1798, he calls upon the states to resist the unjust actions of the federal government. In Power versus Liberty, James Reed argues that Madison was fundamentally consistent, even though it may not have seemed that way. He says that for Madison, the possibility of reconciling the power of government and the liberty of citizens depends above all on the existence of clear boundaries to governmental power publicly agreed upon by an enduring majority of the people. He quotes Madison as saying in a letter to Jefferson in 1788 that liberty should be equally exposed to danger whether the government have too much or too little power, and that the line which divides these extremes should be so inaccurately defined by experience. Madison's views on the subjects didn't necessarily change so much as he adapted his views to support the Constitution that had been ratified by the people. So Madison didn't disagree with Hamilton's plan simply because he didn't like the plan itself anymore, but because it gave the national government a power that he knew the people ratifying the Constitution had known it not to have. His goal was to support the government that had been agreed upon by the people.